Hi everyone, Anthony Morganti here. As you probably know, over the past couple years, Adobe has revamped the masking in Lightroom and they've added AI noise reduction. Because of that, I've had to reimagine my post-production workflow for several different types of photography. One of the types of photography that I enjoy doing is wildlife photography, and I've really had to rethink my post-production workflow for wildlife photography because the new masking and the new AI noise reduction in Lightroom is so effective. So in today's video, I want to show you my new wildlife photography post-production workflow. I'm going to be using Lightroom Classic, but what I'm going to be showing you will also apply to the cloud version of Lightroom and to Adobe Camera Raw. Now, there are a lot of different situations where you may take a wildlife photo. For example, you may be lucky enough to get close enough to the subject as I did for this red-tailed hawk and be fortunate enough to shoot with a very low ISO. As a matter of fact, for this specific image, I used the lowest native ISO on my camera, ISO 100. So this type of image, although a little bit rare for wildlife photography, is possible where you'd have a very low ISO and you don't want or don't need to crop. So I would edit this image a specific way. Compare that to this image where I used a higher ISO, in this case ISO 1600, and it's framed okay, but maybe I want to crop this one a little. And what you will encounter when you're shooting wildlife images is you'll have a lot of the same type of image because you're shooting on high-speed continuous. And in the same sequence, I have this image. Well, it's not the same sequence. I just spun my camera horizontally, zoomed in a little closer, and I have this image of the same bird, same conditions, same lighting. Everything is pretty much identical, except this one is horizontal and maybe in a bit tighter, and this one is vertical and a little bit further away. I'll have a lot of images like this that are pretty much the same. They're just maybe framed slightly differently, or the expression of the wildlife, in this case, the blue heron, is slightly different. So I may want to edit all of these images. Well, there is a specific workflow that I'll use to edit this image and this image together, and I'll show you that as well in this video. And finally, maybe the more common type of wildlife photography you'll encounter. You used a relatively high ISO, in this case ISO 800. You weren't able to get in super tight like you wanted to, so you're a little bit further away, so you're going to have to do some cropping. And also, unlike the image of the red-tailed hawk that I initially showed you, this bird, this woodpecker, it's got other stuff around it. It's got a colorful background. It's on a tree. I may, when I do adjustments, want to make sure that I'm doing adjustments that won't adversely affect the tree or the background. So I need to edit this one a bit differently than those other images. So we'll be editing this image as well. Now let's start with the easiest one, this red-tailed hawk. I like the framing, so I don't want to crop it. I like this empty space going on around behind the hawk. Really, I just need to worry about the bird, and I happen to nail exposure, so I really don't have to worry about exposure. The white balance is fine. It was shot at ISO 100. I don't have to worry about noise reduction. For this type of image, I would jump right to masking and just start doing edits to the hawk because that is the star of the show. So I'm not going to do any global adjustments outside of maybe this was shot with a DSLR, so I do have to come in and do profile corrections, lens corrections there. So I'll do that. So that's the only thing I've done globally. Other than that, I'll just jump right to masking and I'll mask the subject. Make sure that it got the actual subject. In this case, it did so perfectly. If I needed to add to the subject, I could click here and add with a brush most often, or I could use another one of the masking tools to add to this mask. Or if I need to subtract, I could click the subtract button and do the same. But in this case, I'm good. I think it's fine the way it's selected the hawk. Now I'm going to edit tone first. So in this case, I want to make sure these brightest feathers that I could see detail in there. So I'll take the highlights down, and I'll just take it, in this case, all the way down. I'll open up the shadows a little bit so make sure I could see into the shadows. Then I need to get a white and black point. Now, unfortunately, in masking, the little trick you could use when you're using the global whites and black slider by holding in the Alt Option key, Alt if you have PC, Option if you have Mac, does not work on masking. So what you can do is you could turn on the clipping indicators. Hit the J key and you'll turn on clipping indicators. And you'll notice that if you, in this case, turn whites up too high, you'll start to get a red overlay on the image. That means you're clipping the highlights. So I'll just back this off until all that red dissipates, because I mentioned I want to make sure that I see feather detail in the brightest parts of the hawk. Now, as far as blacks are concerned, similarly, when I click on that and move that to left, I'll get a blue overlay on the image. That means I'm crushing the shadows. There is absolute black there. Now, I don't mind crushing the shadows. Most often, my images, I like my images to have absolute black in them. And tell you the truth, this bird did have some absolute black in it. The bird's eyes were absolute black and some of the feather detail was black. So I will crush the shadows on this bird. Then to turn those clipping indicators off, tap the J key again. So I just did a whites and blacks adjustment. Now, next I'll go to color. And as far as color is concerned, I mentioned before that the color temp, the white balance was fine for this image, so I didn't have to worry about that. Definitely don't have to worry about it when I'm masking either. It's saturation. There's only a saturation slider. There isn't a vibrant slider. This saturation slider, though, works a bit differently than the saturation slider that's in the Global Adjustment Basic tab. This one, if I move it all the way down, it will act more as a vibrant slider, or I'm sorry, it will work as a saturation slider where it will make the subject, in this case, black and white. If I move it all the way up, it acts more as a vibrant slider where it will not oversaturate any of the colors. So it's kind of a combination of the vibrance and saturation sliders. So all the way down, or when you move it down, it acts like a saturation slider where it kind of linearly will remove color from, in this case, the subject. When you move it up, though, it will act more like the vibrant slider. So we'll just add some saturation or vibrance to the bird. All right. Now I'd like to sharpen the bird. So I'm going to go to detail. I mentioned this was shot at ISO 100. There really isn't any discernible noise. So I'm just going to sharpen. I'm going to bring sharpening up. So I'm done editing the bird, but the background is very bright and it's rather distracting. So I want to do something with that. So I'm going to go up to create a new mask and we're going to select the background. And this time it will select everything but the bird. And again, I'll start out with tone and I'll go to exposure and I'll bring exposure down a little bit. I'll bring highlights down all the way. I'll bring shadows down a little bit. Bring exposure down a little bit more. Now, what I can do, if there was a lot of distracting color there, I would go to the color tab, go to saturation and pull that down, but there really isn't any distracting color to speak of. But if there were, that's what I would do. But I will go to effects and I will take clarity down a little bit just to blur it out a little more, maybe take texture down a little more. And then I'm really done, but often I like to add a vignette. So now I'm done with masking. So I will jump down to effects, and this is a global adjustment, and I'll just add a little vignette. So there is my editing workflow on a wildlife image that was shot with very low ISO and doesn't really have any noise in it and doesn't really have anything except the actual wildlife, in this case the red-tailed hawk, in it. So there's before and there's after. There's before and there's after. Now let's talk about this next situation you may encounter. You have your camera on high speed continuous and you have a lot of similar images. How would you go about editing an image such as this or these? In this case, I'll have two. I'm going to do this one. All right. So I'm going to edit this image first. Now, as I mentioned with that previous image, and this image is the same way, it was shot with a DSLR. So I will come in and do lens corrections right away. It was shot with a relatively high ISO 1600. So I will do AI noise reduction on this image. Now, to do it, you would just go to the Detail tab and you would click on Denoise. Now, Denoise will only work on native RAW files. Those are RAW files from the camera, and they'll only work on RAW files that were created by cameras that have either a Bayer or an X-Trans sensor. So if your camera doesn't have a Bayer style or X-Trans style sensor, the Denoise button will not be active. You'd have to use manual noise reduction here, but I recommend you don't. If this Denoise button for your RAW files is not active, and unfortunately at this time, Lightroom cannot use Denoise AI on it, what I recommend you do is get an application like Topaz Labs Photo AI or Topaz Labs Denoise AI and use that app to remove your noise. In this case, I could use Lightroom, so I'm just going to click on Denoise. What you'll do is you'll get this like preview box. You could zoom out by clicking on this little minus magnifier, and then I like to zoom in to kind of a critical area. I want to make sure that I'm not removing so much noise that I'm blurring out the subject, and on the other hand, I want to make sure that I'm not leaving any noise there. So right now, the Denoise slider is at 50. It will remember what your last setting was. So I'm going to push it up to 75. So that's somewhere between 50 and 100, of course, right halfway. And as I look at it at 75, it definitely removed all the noise, and it doesn't really appear to be softening the image. If I click on this little preview, I'll get a before and an after. Before, after. I think that looks pretty good. I'm just going to leave it right there, and I'm going to click Enhance. Now, what will happen is Lightroom will create a DNG file. The DNG file will have the lens corrections applied to it that I did already, and it will have the noise removed. Now, unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, you will not have the original RAW file with the noise removed. Lightroom is a non-destructive RAW editor, so it's not going to touch or edit your original RAW file in any way. That's why it creates this DNG file. Now, this file has the noise removed, so I now could do editing here. Now, the next step in my workflow is I like to crop if it needs to be cropped. Now, I have all this busyness on the left and right, and unlike the image of the red-tailed hawk, I don't like this stuff on the left and right. So I am going to crop it, and I actually want to crop it vertically. So I'm going to shift. I have the padlock locked. I'm using the original ratio, which is 3:2, but I'm going to shift it to 2:3 by hitting the X key on my keyboard. Then I'll reposition, and I'll pull up from the bottom to get a tighter crop. Move it this way a bit. And I'll take the crop or accept the crop. I could just accept the crop. I'll just click on Close. And there is our cropped image. And now I'll do some editing. Now, I think globally everything looks okay. I don't really need to worry about doing global tone adjustments or global color adjustments. So I am going to not do any global adjustments. I'm going to jump right to masking, and we're going to mask the subject as I did before. And I'll try to do this quickly because it's going to be pretty much the same routine where I'm going to take highlights down. I'm going to open up shadows a little bit. I'm going to hit the J key so I get some overlay there, and then pull that back until all that red dissipates. Right about there. And then a little absolute black, I don't mind. Right? Then we're going to go to color. We're going to add a little bit of saturation. Turn those clipping indicators off. Hit that J key again. So that might be a little bit too much saturation. Right? So that looks pretty good. So far, so good. And then I'm going to get a new mask. I'm going to select the background. So it's everything except the bird. And then I'm going to go to tone, and we'll take exposure down a little bit. Take the highlights down a little bit. We'll go to the color, and I want to pull a little saturation away from the background. So the bird stands out a little more than the background. Then I could jump back to the other mask, the mask of the bird, by clicking on it. And in this case, maybe I want to go to tone and I just want to make it a little brighter. A bit brighter. Turn those clipping indicators on again. I'm not clipping shadow or highlights, surprisingly. Okay, so that's okay. And then I'm done with masking. I'll jump down to effects and I'll add my darker vignette. And now I edited this image. Now, again, this is the before version of the image, but I did crop it. You're not seeing the crop. And there's after. Now, I mentioned, though, that I have this other image that is very similar, and the editing would probably be pretty much identical for this image. Now, what I could do is, this is in a stack. You see how it says 2? Click on the number 2, and I broke out the stack. So there is the original Nikon RAW file, and there is our DNG file. I need to copy the edits I did on this image to this image, but the noise reduction won't be copied with it. So what I need to do is I need to do noise reduction to this image by itself, all by itself. So I'm going to do that right now. I'm just going to go to Detail, and I'm going to click on Denoise. Now, I like that it remembers your last setting you used, and it's going to be identical for this image because it was pretty much the same lighting, same ISO was used. So pretty much everything was the same. So I could save a lot of time, just bring that up and click Process or do it. And it's going to create now a second DNG file for this image. And let it do its thing. All right, so now we have this DNG file. Now I'm going to, it's stacked, so I'm going to click on it to unstack it. So there it is. To copy the edits from the original, the first image that I edited of this blue heron, click on that so it's active. So this is my edited image. Hold the Command or Control key down and click on the image you want to copy the adjustments to this one. I think it's that one. Let me double check by clicking off. Yes, it's that one. So click on the original one. Hold the Command and Control or Control key down. Click on that other one. So we're clicked on the edited image first. Then hold the Control Command key down and click on the unedited image. Go over here on the right-hand side. See this? It says Auto Sync Now, but it says that because I have this switch on. Turn that off. Click on Sync. We want to check all except we don't want to copy the crop over. We want to copy everything else though. And then click Synchronize. And what it will do is it will do a new mask, subject mask, and a new background mask for this other image, which is right here. And there is our edited image. So you can see we have an edit here. So you could see that if I go to, say, effects, you could see it has the vignette. And if I go to masking, you could see that it has the subject mask and the background mask. And if I click on, say, the subject mask, you'd see our adjustments were applied to the subject there. Now, I could touch this up. The reflection didn't really work out down here because the water wasn't really still and had lily pads and whatnot. So I could make this tighter, so I could crop this one in and just do my editing that way. That just saves a lot of time copying those adjustments from one image to another. Now, a situation you probably more often find yourself is when you have an image, but you're really not as tight as you want it to be, and there's a lot of other things in the image beside just the subject of the photo that you have to worry about when you're editing, and that's this type of image. So again, this is ISO 800, and if I zoom in, you can see that there is a considerable amount of noise. So what I could do here is it doesn't really matter when you do lens corrections. To tell you the truth, you could do them to the DNG after you do the noise reduction, or you could do them now and they'll get copied to the DNG, but I have the habit of doing them right away. And then I'll go to Detail and I'll click on Denoise. And then I'll zoom out. I'll click on somewhere that I always call mission critical, where I want to make sure that the noise is being removed because there's more noise on the blurry background than there is on the woodpecker. And I just make sure that it's not blurring out the woodpecker so much. So what I'll do is I usually start at 50 and I could see a little bit of noise in here, and I was at 75 and noise was gone at 75. So I'll do somewhere in the middle, like 62, 63, 64. That looks actually pretty good. I usually don't lose a lot of sleep over this, and I don't go too like crazy here. I'm not going to put this in a stack, so I'll uncheck that box and we'll click Enhance. So we'll get this D&G version of the image, which will have the noise removed. Then I'll continue with my editing. The next step I like to do after I get rid of the noise is I like to crop the image. So I'll crop the image next, and then I'll do global editing if it needs it. You noticed on some of those images, the last two, actually, I did very little, if any, global editing at all. And then I'll do masking as well. So this is our noise reduced image here. I'll jump to crop. I want to keep the ratio, the original ratio, so I make sure this padlock is locked. I'm going to hit the X key, so I'll flip it so that it's a vertical image. And see, you kind of usually like to have maybe the rule of thirds on like an eye of the image, or of the subject, I mean. But in this case, it's the bird's too low. I'd have to crop in a lot tighter. I mean, I could crop in a lot tighter, but something like that, I guess. So we have part of the tree, part of the background in. Let's just see what that looks like. So I'll close this. And it's non-destructive. So if you're not familiar with Lightroom, you could open up cropping again. You still have all those pixels there. It didn't crop them away, and you could come in and recrop. But that looks okay. Now I'll do some global adjustments to this because this tree is here as well that is in focus, and I want to make sure that the adjustments I do, affect the tree as well. So this is the situation you'll probably most often be in. So I'm going to take highlights down until I see detail into the bird's feathers here. I'm going to open up shadows so I see details in the darkest part here. Then I'll get a white and black point. I could do this the way I most often do it by holding the Option key on my Mac. It's Alt key on a PC. Click on the whites slider. The screen turns black. I'll move this to the right, and you'll see that we start to get some colors bleed through. Pull this back until all that color is gone. That means I'm not clipping any of the channels, red, green, or blue. Similarly, I'll hold in that Option key on my Mac for this black slider. Move this to the left until I see some colors come through. You can see I'm starting to clip. That's okay. Kind of like that. So I like what I've done so far. Now I might add some clarity to this and some texture, a little bit. I don't want to overdo it yet. I just want to add enough, a little bit, because I can add texture and clarity with masking when the time comes. I'm not going to add any vibrance. You can see how this background is really colorful, and I really don't want to distract from the bird. So I want to do that with masking. So I think I'm okay with my global adjustments. I don't think I'm going to do anything else. What I am going to do, though, is then open masking, and we're going to mask our subject first. And you can see it over-selected in here. So just for demonstration purposes, I'd get a subtract brush, and I'd come in here and remove the adjustment from the tree down here. Now, I think I'm all right. Thought I got part of the bird, but I didn't. You find you made a mistake, like this bird's foot is right here, and let's say I wanted the bird's foot selected. Hold in the with this minus brush. See how the brush has a minus sign right in the middle of it? Hold in the Option key on a Mac, Alt key on a PC, and you'll get a plus brush. Then you could resize it, and you could come in and add to your mask with this brush. All right, so we add, oops, didn't want to do that. All right, that's for the sake of argument. Let's say that is good enough. And here I want to jump right down to effects. We're going to add some more clarity to the bird here, some more texture. We're going to go to detail and add some sharpening. I forgot to sharpen actually the previous bird we did, but that's okay. So I usually almost always add sharpening. Then I think the bird looks okay. So now we're going to create a new mask, and it's going to be the background. But I don't want it to affect the tree. I just want it to affect the background over here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract from this with an objects mask. And I want to use the brush. This is this option as opposed to the marquee tool. Marquee tool, you could draw like a box around something and have it selected. But I'm going to use the brush, and this is going to subtract, and I want to subtract from the tree. So we're going to come down here and subtract from the tree. So we'll go like this, up, and we'll come across like this and like this. So it should theoretically get rid of the tree. It didn't get rid of all the tree, unfortunately. I could subtract again. You could try to use a brush. So you come in here and just subtract it from the tree like this. I could have used the brush right from the beginning probably, and it would have probably worked out better. Come in here like this. And for the sake of this video, I think that's good enough and fast enough. And what I want to do here is I want to make the background less noticeable. So I'm going to take exposure down, maybe take the highlights down quite a bit. Maybe take some of the contrast away, then jump down to color, and we're going to go to saturation and pull some of the saturation out of that background like that. Then go to effects, and I think we'll take clarity down, make it a bit more blurry. And then I'm done there. I think we'll just finish it off with my global effects adjustment, and we'll just add a darker vignette like that. So there is before, after, before, after. So that's my new workflow when working on wildlife images. A couple different scenarios you may run into, and how I go about editing those types of images. Thank you, everyone who watches my videos. I really do appreciate it. I'll talk to you guys soon.